Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Pied Piper of Pasadena, Part 7. This is the story of Dean Corll. I wanted to also make a quick ad on this, that the next series of videos that you're going to be watching, you should be 18 to view these videos, or at least with an adult supervision. The stories in the next series of stories about Dean Corll are extremely graphic in nature and will include not only rape and torture, but the SA of children varying from ages from 12 to 19. Severe discretion is greatly advised. When we last left off, we had talked about how David Brooks would befriend Dean Corll, and we would later find out that Dean Corll had began grooming David Brooks at a very early age of 12 years old. He would often take him rides on his motorcycle or take him on various road trips to the beach, more than enough times in a windowless white van that he had also owned. And it is also noted that whenever Brooks needed any kind of money, Dean Corll would just give it. So by the time that David Brooks had turned 14, their relationship had turned sexual. But you look back at David Brooks and you realize that from the moment Dean Corll had introduced himself, he had began grooming him at the age of 12. And when we last left off, we had talked about how David Brooks' parents would get divorced. So a lot of times, if he wasn't at his father's house, he was spending a lot of time at Dean Corll's apartment, wherever he was living at. And he would often call Dean Corll's place a second home. Sometime in September of 1970, David Brooks would actually walk into Dean Corll's apartment. And when he opened up the bedroom door, there he would find Dean Corll completely naked, and he would find two boys strapped to a makeshift torture bed or torture board that would be suspended from the ceiling. And when Brooks would walk in, Dean would jump up and he would say, "I'm just having some fun with them." Then he would also tell Brooks that if he promised to keep quiet about what he saw, he would buy him a brand new car. Upon seeing this, Brooks just slowly turned around and walked away. I really wish this is the point in time where Brooks would actually go to the police, but sadly it isn't. It's said that a few days would go by and Dean Corll would actually call up David Brooks and invite him out to a local diner, to where David Brooks would actually meet up with Dean Corll. And there, Dean Corll would actually confide and tell David Brooks that on the night that he had walked in and saw the two boys that Dean Corll had actually snatched up from an orphanage, that not only had he raped these two boys, but he had also murdered, and he would murder these victims by strangulation with a nylon stocking. And after he had killed both boys, he had actually buried them. He would then go and approach David Brooks and say, for every single boy that he would lure to Dean Corll, he would pay Brooks $200 per boy, or $1,500 in today's money. And again, I really wish this is the part of the story where David Brooks makes a phone call to the police. But unfortunately it isn't. And because he had been so heavily groomed for the past few years, he actually went along with this proposition. On September 15th, 1970, shortly after Dean Corll's grim proposal to David Brooks, Jeffrey Conan would actually be leaving college for the weekend to join his family, and he would begin hitchhiking cross country. Along with Jeffrey Conan, he would be accompanied by his classmate Ryan Lopez, who would be doing the same thing, trying to hitchhike cross country to be with his family on the weekend in Houston. And they both would just joined together and began hitchhiking from friendly drivers who would give them a ride across their 150-mile journey. And eventually they would come across a gentleman who would promise to take them into the Houston area. And shortly after they would get into the vehicle, his tire would actually blow, and both boys would actually jump out and actually help change the tire. So the gentleman would actually promise to treat the boys to a drink when they got the tire fixed, which he did. After the man had treated both boys with a drink, he would actually drop off Jeffrey Conan in a place called Uptown, and then he would take Ryan Lopez home. This is the last time that Ryan Lopez would see his former classmate alive. Jeffrey Conan had a very small frame, and for his age, he actually looked a lot younger. And this is probably why Dean Corll targeted him. Police would speculate that after being dropped off at Uptown, that Jeffrey Conan would actually try to hitchhike a ride home since he was almost there. Unfortunately, the car that he had gotten into belonged to Dean Corll. After Jeffrey Conan had went missing, his parents had speculated that it was a robbery gone wrong, because at the time of when Jeffrey Conan was hitchhiking home, with him he had actually had a check for his tuition for college, which was roughly about $250, which is in today's money right around $3,000. So they would regularly check the banks and see if the check had been cashed, and unfortunately the check had not been cashed. And like most of the kids that you're going to see here, they would go to the police and they would file Jeffrey Conan for being missing. And the police, without even investigating the matter, would just look at his parents and say, well, he's probably a runaway. And they would file him as a runaway because at that point in time in the 70s, a lot of kids had began running away from home. The police would also tell the parents of Jeffrey Conan not to worry, that because he was probably a runaway, he would turn up within a few days. And the police would be right about one thing. When they had told Conan's parents that he would show up in a few days, they really weren't wrong, because 3 days later at High Island Beach, they would find the body of Jeffrey Conan. He would be found in a shallow grave and would be bound and gagged. And he would be wrapped in a plastic sheet with a very thin layer of lime laid over the plastic sheet. He would also have a giant boulder rolled over the shallow grave to prevent animals from digging it up. He had also been sodomized and had been killed by asphyxiation. It is also noted that David Brooks also knew where Jeffrey Conan was. Now, we know that Dean Corll had began killing due to his discarding of defective candies, but this is the first known victim of Dean Corll. On September 17th, 1970, Dean Corll would actually drive over to Southwest Storage, which actually resided on the outskirts of Houston, and he would go up to the owner, Mamie Mariner, and he would rent out storage shed number 11 for about $20 a month. On December 14th, 1970, James Glass and Danny Yates would attend with their family at a religious rally, and there they would encounter David Brooks. It is also noted that both boys were 14, and they also knew Brooks from school. Brooks would walk up to them and tell them that instead of going to the rally, he would actually be going to a party at Dean Corll's apartment. So while services was going on, it could be seen that Brooks would get up with Glass and Yates, and they would be seen walking to the bathroom. And just like most of the children in this story, they would just vanish into thin air.